You could spend 12 hours in the library with a neon yellow highlighter, painting the entire book like it's a coloring book, and I guarantee you, congratulations, you just spent 12 hours doing absolutely nothing but coloring. What separates the genius from the parrot isn't how much they read, nor the magical technique they use to highlight words. The difference lies in what happens inside the black box, right there in the spongy tissue of your brain. Most of you study as if you were stacking bricks in a vacant lot. You pick up a fact, throw it there. Pick up a formula, throw it there. And you expect that magically a house will appear. It's not going to happen. Real learning is architecture, not accumulation. Deep processing is any type of thinking that leads you to form a schema of knowledge, an interconnected network. Think of your memory like a spider web. If you throw a piece of information at it and it doesn't stick to anything, if it stays isolated, floating in a vacuum, guess what your brain does? It throws it out. The brain is absurdly efficient at forgetting what isn't connected. It says, "This is useless. Bye." That's why you read a page and by the time you get to the bottom, you've already forgotten the top. You did shallow processing. You focused on memorizing, on repeating, on knowing the name. That is isolated learning. The secret to learning faster than everyone else is to force integrated learning. You don't just want to understand the concept, you want to know where it lives, who its neighbors are, and how it compares to the concept down the street. When you try to explain something complex simply, the essence of my favorite technique, you are forcing your brain to do this deep processing. You are creating analogies, comparing and contrasting. So electricity flows like water in a pipe. Bingo! The moment you make that connection, you stopped memorizing and started understanding. You integrated the information into your web, and once it's stuck in the web, connected to other things you already know, the brain protects it like gold. People who do this naturally are the ones you call geniuses or talented, the ones who get high grades without studying as much. But the good news, thanks to neuroplasticity, is that you can train this. It's not genetics, it's habit. So, from now on, I want you to install a radar in your head, an intellectual lie detector. Ask yourself every 5 minutes, is my learning right now isolated or integrated? If you are just trying to memorize the definition, stop. You are digging a hole in water. Change your approach. Ask, how does this look like something I already know? Why is this different from that? Force the connection. Is it uncomfortable? Is it hard? Great! The discomfort is the sound of your neurons lifting weights. If it were easy, you wouldn't be learning. You'd just be strolling. But be careful. Even with deep processing, you can get lost if you don't have a control mechanism, a steering wheel to guide this mental Ferrari. And that is exactly where most people spin out on the curve. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to say might sound like an insult at first glance, but it is the key that unlocks the universe of knowledge. Most of you are doing it wrong. You look at a book, at a formula, at a complex concept, and you think that knowing the name of something is the same as knowing something. It's not. I can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when I'm done, I'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. I'll only know about the humans who named it. To learn for real, to learn fast, to learn in a way that sticks to your mind like gum on a shoe, requires something more. It requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop kidding yourself. And the best way to stop kidding yourself is to try to teach what you think you know to someone who knows nothing, or better yet, to a 5-year-old. If you can't explain it simply, you didn't understand it. Period. Now, imagine with me something that will change the way you face every book, every class, every new intellectual challenge. Imagine there is a secret, not magic, but a method, a sort of algorithm for the brain that allows you to devour information and transform it into deep understanding, not just cheap memorization. This method, my friends, starts with a fundamental shift in your head. The first step isn't opening the book, it's opening the mind. I'm talking about mindset. You see confusion as the enemy. You look at a difficult problem, feel that knot in your stomach, that feeling of, I'm too dumb for this, and you run. Wrong. Confusion is the signal. It is the pain of intellectual growth. If you aren't confused, you aren't learning. You're just reviewing what you already know. People with a fixed mindset look at a mistake and see failure. People who learn fast, who really understand the gears of the world, look at a mistake and see data. They see information. Ah, so it's not this way. Interesting. It is this curiosity in the face of error that accelerates learning by 20 times. Yes, 20 times. I'm not the one saying it, the data is. So, the first thing you need to do to master this technique, to learn faster than everyone else, is to embrace the initial stupidity. Accept that you are going to feel like an idiot at the beginning. And guess what? It's wonderful, because that is the moment the magic happens. It's when your brain starts making new connections, neuroplasticity kicks in, breaking and remaking paths. But you have to want this. You have to be willing to look foolish to become a genius. If you are afraid of making mistakes, you've already lost before you started. Learning to learn is absurdly important and absurdly complicated, but it starts with this simple permission, the permission to be wrong. Now, it's no use having the right mindset if you can't even get your butt in the chair. And here we enter the second dimension, something many of you ignore because you think it's stuff for clean freaks, but it's pure physics, self-management. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you think you're going to understand quantum mechanics in 30-second bursts, I have bad news. You won't. Deep learning requires a protected environment. It requires you to manage your focus as if it were the scarcest resource on the planet, because it is. You need to identify the chain of events that leads to your distraction. You pick up your phone to check the time, see a notification, click it, and poof, an hour is gone. You need to cut this at the root. Isolate the behavior. Remove the temptation. Create a space where deep study can actually happen. Without this, the technique I'm going to teach you is nothing more than a nice theoretical idea. You need uninterrupted time and attention to truly process the information. And process is the key word here. It's not about reading. Reading is easy. Anyone can read. It's about what your brain does with what you read. And that is where the majority fails miserably. Forget everything you think you know about studying. Seriously, throw it out. Most of you treat the brain like it's a supermarket shopping basket. You walk down the information aisles, grab a fact here, a formula there, throw it all in the basket, and think that when you get to the checkout counter, you've magically become intelligent. Let me tell you a secret. When you get to the checkout counter, the basket has a hole in it. You lost everything on the way. This is what we call shallow processing. You read the words, your eyes moved from left to right, but your brain was in standby mode. Real learning, the kind that sticks, the kind that allows you to solve problems you've never seen before, happens in a different dimension. We call this deep processing, but the fancy name gets in the way. Let's call it what it really is: the art of not letting information die of loneliness. Understand one thing about your gray matter: it hates orphaned information. If you learn an isolated fact, let's say the definition of mitochondria, and you don't connect it to anything, your brain looks at it and says, "This connects to nothing I already know, therefore it's trash." And poof, it disappears in less than a minute. Deep processing is the deliberate act of stitching new information into the fabric of what you already know. It's not about memorizing, it's about integrating. Imagine that your knowledge is a giant spider web. The amateur student tries to glue a speck of dust in the air with no thread attached. The genius pulls a thread from the existing web and ties it to the new information. He asks, "How is this similar to what I saw yesterday? How is this different from what I expected? If this is true, what else must be true?" Do you want to know if you are really learning or just wasting time? Turn on your radar for isolated versus integrated. If you are reading and thinking, "Okay, got the definition, next," you are in isolated mode. You are digging your own intellectual grave. Integrated mode is loud. It's chaotic. You stop and think, "Wait, this works exactly like the water pressure in the pipes at my house." In that moment, when you create an analogy, when you translate the complex into the simple, you created a physical hook in your brain. You transformed a loose piece of data into a robust knowledge schema. That's why I always say, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, you didn't understand it. because explaining requires you to connect the new idea to concepts she already has. But I'm going to be honest with you. This hurts. Deep processing is uncomfortable. It's exhausting. Your brain is going to want to go back to the comfort of just highlighting the text and passively rereading. Resisting that comfort is what separates the curious from the mediocre. You are building mental muscles, and there is no hypertrophy without sweat. Now, you can have the right mindset, the perfect environment, and be willing to process deeply. But how do you guarantee you aren't kidding yourself along the way? How do you know if your brilliant analogy isn't actually complete nonsense? You need a real-time quality control system. You need to be the manager of your own mental factory. And this is where most people smash their faces against the wall, because the fourth dimension is missing. You are there, sweating bullets, trying to connect the dots, creating analogies, forcing your brain out of its comfort zone. Great, but who is in command? Who is checking if you aren't just running in circles with great intensity? Most of you study like a broken robot that hits a wall, backs up, and hits the same wall again, only harder, hoping the wall will move. That's not persistence, it's insanity. To learn faster than anyone else, you need to develop a dual personality. You need to be the student who is learning and at the same time the cruel scientist observing that student with a clipboard in hand. We enter the fourth dimension, self-regulation. It is the ability to monitor your own thinking in real time and, most importantly, have the courage to change course when the ship is sinking. Most people have a primitive adjustment strategy. Oh, I did poorly on the test? I'll study more hours. Wrong. More hours doing the wrong thing just creates a more consolidated mistake. Self-regulation requires a constant three-step cycle: cue, monitoring, and adjusting. You are reading a complex text. Suddenly, your eyes pass over 3 paragraphs and you absorbed nothing. That is the cue. The mediocre student ignores the cue and keeps reading, praying for a miracle. The elite student monitors. Whoops, my brain turned off. Passive mode took over. And then he makes the adjustment. He doesn't keep reading. He stops. He changes the technique. Reading isn't working. I'm going to draw a diagram. I'm going to try to explain it out loud to the wall. I'm going to ask the book a question. He changes tactics until deep processing starts happening again. But here is the deadly trap where most of you will fall. And I need you to pay double attention now. There is a treacherous phenomenon called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When you start self-regulating, when you realize your passive reading is garbage and decide to switch to an active technique, like trying to explain the concept without looking, my favorite, do you know what will happen? It's going to seem harder. It's going to seem like you're learning less because you're struggling more. And your brain, lazy as it is, will scream, "Hey, this is too hard. It must be wrong. Let's go back to highlighting text. That felt nicer." If you listen to that voice, you've lost. The difficulty isn't a sign that you are failing. It is physical proof that you are learning. If you change your technique and feel like your brain is frying, congratulations, you just found the way. Don't retreat to comfort. Self-regulation is the discipline of feeling the discomfort of inefficiency, adjusting to a harder technique, and enduring the pain of growth. You need to be ruthless with your own method. Don't fall in love with the way you study. Fall in love with understanding. If a tool doesn't work, throw it out and grab another. Test, fail, adjust, repeat. If you do this, you stop being a passive passenger in your education and become the pilot. But even if you have the mindset, the focus, the deep processing, and the self-regulation, there is a final villain, a silent thief that steals everything you've achieved while you sleep. You can understand everything today, be an absolute genius at 10 p.m., and wake up tomorrow a complete ignoramus. And it's not your fault, it's biology. But there is a way to hack this too. The villain I mentioned? His name is decay. It is the law of entropy applied to your memory. You built that beautiful house of cards of knowledge last night, and this morning, the wind blew and half of it fell. This is biological. It is inevitable. As soon as you learn something, that information begins to fade. Your brain is a machine of efficiency. It doesn't want to waste energy maintaining neural connections for information you don't use, so it cleans house. And if you do nothing, you are going to spend your whole life filling a leaky bucket, learning and forgetting, in an eternal cycle of mediocrity. How do we stop this bleeding? We enter the fifth and final dimension, the one that guarantees knowledge stays, retrieval. And please, for the love of physics, do not confuse this with reviewing. Reviewing, for most of you, is scanning your colorful notes and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember this." Lie. You don't remember. You just recognize. Recognizing is passive and easy. Retrieving is active and painful. Retrieving is closing the book, looking at the ceiling, ignoring your notes, and forcing your brain to reconstruct the concept from scratch. It is dragging the information out of long-term memory. It is the difference between looking at the answer to a math equation and thinking you understood it, versus having a blank sheet in front of you and having to solve the equation yourself. The secret here is timing. If you try to retrieve 5 seconds after reading, it's too easy. It doesn't count. You need to let the forgetting start to act. You need to let the rust set in a little. This is what we call spaced retrieval. You learn today, try to remember tomorrow. It's going to be hard. You will stutter. But when you manage to pull that information back from the depths, you send a powerful chemical signal to your brain. Hey, stop! Don't throw this away. I need this. You reset the forgetting curve, and every time you do this, the memory decays more slowly. You are literally refilling the memory before it empties. But there is a final trap for those who think they are clever. Don't be a flashcard robot. Many of you fall into the error of practicing retrieval in an isolated way. You memorize definitions like parrots. What is the mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. Great. You memorize the phrase. But if I give you a complex biology problem where cellular energy is the key, you freeze. Why? Because you practiced isolated retrieval, not integrated retrieval. The golden rule is, practice how you play. If in the real world or on your exam you need to solve problems, it's useless to practice reciting definitions. You need to retrieve knowledge by applying it. Mix up the subjects. Use interleaving. Attack the problem from different angles. Force your brain to not just remember what it is, but where and how to use it. Now you have the complete map. You have the 5 keys. But having the treasure map doesn't make you rich if you don't start digging. And most of you, unfortunately, love collecting maps and hate picking up the shovel. Mindset to accept the mistake, self-management to create the space, deep processing to weave the web, self-regulation to pilot the process, and retrieval to beat time. But let me tell you one last inconvenient truth, perhaps the most important of all. Knowing how the engine works doesn't make the car go. You can watch this video 100 times. You can tattoo deep processing on your forehead. But if you don't close this tab right now and go there, in the silence, to fight against the confusion and the urge to give up, nothing will change. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Do not confuse the familiarity of watching a video with real understanding. Nature cannot be fooled. Your brain cannot be cheated. Either you build the connections or you have nothing. If you made it this far, if you endured the complexity and are willing to embrace the discomfort, you are already part of an absolute minority. Prove it now. I want you to make a brutal diagnosis of yourself right here and now. Which of these 5 dimensions is your anchor? What is your speed limiter? Is it the fragile mindset? Is it the lack of focus? Is it shallow studying? Comment below with the exact phrase, "My limiter is," and complete it with the dimension you are going to destroy starting today. Make it public. Commit to it. Most people will close this video and go back to the comfort of the shallow, of the illusion of competence. They will continue studying a lot and learning little, frustrated, blaming a lack of talent, but not you. Now you know that talent is a lie. What exists is the method. You have the choice to step out of the cave. Learning to learn is the superpower that makes all other superpowers possible. If you master this, there is no book too hard. There is no concept too complex. The whole world opens up for you to play. And if this spark lit something inside you, if you felt that tingle of curiosity you haven't felt in a long time, smash the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you value depth in a world addicted to superficiality. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the universe of knowledge without training wheels. Class is dismissed. Now, the real work. What if the difference between ordinary thinking and genius thinking isn't about being born with a special brain, but about using the brain you already have in a completely different way? Most people assume that brilliance is something you either have or you don't. They look at great minds throughout history and think these individuals possess some rare gift that sets them apart from everyone else. But this assumption misses something fundamental about how the human mind actually works. The brain isn't a static object with fixed capabilities. It's more like a muscle that changes based on how it's used. And the way most people use their minds keeps them trapped in patterns that prevent genuine understanding. Here's the real problem. When people encounter something difficult to understand, they typically do one of two things. Either they memorize facts and formulas without really grasping what those facts mean, or they give up entirely, convinced the material is beyond their abilities. Both approaches stem from the same mistaken belief that understanding is something that happens to you rather than something you actively create. Think about a typical classroom where students are learning mathematics. The teacher writes equations on the blackboard. Students copy these equations into their notebooks. They practice problems until they can reproduce the steps. When the test comes, they retrieve what they've memorized and write it down. Some students do well on the test, others struggle. But here's what almost no one realizes. Even the students who score highly often don't truly understand what they're doing. They've learned to follow a recipe, but they haven't grasped why the recipe works. This is the difference between knowing and understanding. Knowing means you can reproduce information. Understanding means you can explain why that information is true, how it connects to other ideas, and what would happen if you change something fundamental about it. The human mind is capable of extraordinary understanding, but most people never develop this capacity because they confuse memorization with comprehension. So, how does someone actually rewire their thinking to operate at a higher level? The first principle is deceptively simple. Never move forward until you can explain something in the simplest possible terms. This doesn't mean dumbing things down. It means stripping away all the complex language and getting to the core of what's actually happening. Imagine a student struggling with basic physics, trying to understand why objects fall to the ground. The textbook might say that gravity is a force that attracts masses toward each other, with the force proportional to the product of the masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. A student could memorize this definition. They could even plug numbers into the formula and calculate correct answers. But do they understand gravity? Real understanding comes when that student can close the textbook and explain, in their own words, what gravity actually does. Not using the textbook's language, but describing it as if talking to someone who's never heard of gravity before. Maybe they'd say something like, "There's something about having mass that makes objects pull on each other. The bigger the objects, the stronger the pull. And the farther apart they are, the weaker it gets." That's understanding. That's what it sounds like when someone has actually grasped a concept rather than just memorized words. This brings us to the second principle. Break everything down into smaller pieces until each piece is completely obvious. The brain doesn't handle complexity well when it tries to grasp everything at once, but it's remarkably good at understanding simple things and then building up from there. Consider someone learning to read music. Looking at a full orchestral score can be overwhelming. There are multiple staffs, different clefs, various instruments, all playing different notes simultaneously. Someone who tries to understand all of this at once will feel lost. But what if they start with just one note? A single note on a staff is simple. Anyone can understand that. Then they add another note. Still manageable. Then they understand how these two notes relate to each other. They build up, piece by piece, until eventually they can look at that orchestral score and hear in their mind what it will sound like when played. The genius mind doesn't work faster or hold more information. It works by breaking problems down until each component is trivially simple, then building up understanding from those simple pieces. This is why truly brilliant people can often explain complex ideas in ways that make them seem obvious. They've done the hard work of decomposition, so they can show others the simple building blocks that underlie apparent complexity. The third principle might seem counterintuitive. Spend more time thinking about what you don't understand than what you do understand. Most people do the opposite. They focus on the parts that make sense and skim over the confusing parts, hoping understanding will come later. It rarely does. The confusing parts are where actual learning happens. Picture a mathematician working through a proof in a textbook. They read the first few lines and follow the logic. Then they hit a step that says, "It follows that," or "therefore," before jumping to a conclusion that isn't immediately obvious. Most readers would keep going, assuming the author must be right, but someone developing real understanding would stop. They'd spend time, maybe hours, figuring out exactly how that conclusion follows from the previous statements. They might fill pages with their own work, trying different approaches until suddenly the connection becomes clear. This is uncomfortable. The human mind naturally wants to feel competent and move forward. Dwelling on confusion feels like failure, but this discomfort is precisely where the brain is doing its most important work. When you struggle with something that doesn't make sense, your brain is actively building new connections, trying to integrate this new information with what you already know. Skip over the confusion, and those connections never form. The fourth principle addresses how different concepts relate to each other. Real understanding isn't about knowing lots of isolated facts. It's about seeing how everything connects. The genius mind is constantly asking, how is this like something I already understand? How is it different? What happens if I change this assumption? Could I arrive at the same conclusion from a different starting point? Think about someone studying history. They could memorize dates and events, learning that one war started in a particular year, a treaty was signed in another year, an empire fell in yet another year. That's a collection of facts. But understanding history means seeing patterns. It means recognizing that certain conditions tend to lead to conflict, that economic pressures drive political decisions, that ideas spread and evolve and shape societies. Someone with this kind of understanding doesn't need to memorize as much because they can reason their way through historical developments using general principles. This applies to every subject. In literature, it's not about memorizing plot summaries, but understanding how character motivations drive narrative. In chemistry, it's not about memorizing reactions, but understanding how molecular structure determines behavior. In music, it's not about memorizing finger positions, but understanding how harmony and melody interact. The connections between ideas carry more weight than the ideas themselves. Now, here's what's actually happening in the brain when someone thinks this way. The human brain contains billions of neurons that communicate through connections called synapses. When you learn something new, you're not adding information to some mental filing cabinet. You're creating new patterns of connections between neurons. The strength of understanding depends on how many connections you build and how strong those connections are. When someone memorizes without understanding, they're creating isolated connections. The brain links a question to an answer, a problem type to a solution method. These connections are fragile. They don't integrate with the rest of what that person knows. They're easily forgotten because nothing supports them or reinforces them. But when someone truly understands, they're building a rich network of interconnected ideas. Each concept links to multiple other concepts. When they think about one idea, related ideas naturally come to mind. The understanding is robust because it's supported by this network. Even if they forget specific details, they can often recreate those details by reasoning from what they do remember. This is why explaining something in your own words is so powerful. When you articulate an idea, you're forcing your brain to pull together all the relevant connections and organize them into a coherent structure. If you can't explain something clearly, it means those connections aren't well formed yet. The act of trying to explain actually strengthens and clarifies the connections. The same thing happens when you tackle a problem from multiple angles. Each approach you try builds new connections. Even approaches that don't work out contribute to understanding because they help you see why certain paths lead nowhere. Someone who's solved a problem in only one way has learned that specific solution. Someone who's tried 10 different approaches and found 3 that work has developed genuine mastery. There's something else that happens in a mind that thinks this way. It becomes comfortable with uncertainty. Most people feel anxious when they don't know something. They want immediate answers. They grab onto the first explanation that makes some sense, even if it's superficial. But truly powerful thinking requires sitting with not knowing, exploring possibilities, following threads of reasoning to see where they lead. Picture a scientist in a laboratory, running experiments. The experiments don't always work. In fact, they usually don't work the first time, or the second time, or even the 10th time. But each failed experiment provides information. It rules out certain possibilities. It suggests new questions to investigate. Someone who can't tolerate this uncertainty, who needs every experiment to succeed, will never make important discoveries. The breakthroughs come from being willing to work in the space of not knowing. This same principle applies to any kind of learning. When reading a difficult book, there will be passages that don't make sense on first reading. Someone with a rigid mind gets frustrated and gives up. Someone with a flexible mind sees this as normal. They reread, they think about it, they keep going and come back later. They trust that understanding will emerge through engagement with the material. The practical application of all this is actually quite straightforward, though it requires discipline. When approaching any subject, start by identifying the simplest possible foundation. What are the absolute basics that everything else builds upon? Make sure those basics are crystal clear before moving forward. Let's say someone wants to learn about electricity. They might be tempted to jump straight into circuits and components and calculations, but the foundation is much simpler. Electricity is about the movement of charged particles. That's it. Spend time really understanding what that means. What is charge? What makes charged particles move? Once this foundation is solid, everything else becomes much easier because it all flows from this simple beginning. As new concepts are introduced, constantly relate them back to what's already understood. Don't just accept that resistors reduce current flow. Ask why. What's actually happening at the physical level that causes this? How does this relate to the fundamental idea that electricity is moving charges? Build those connections explicitly. When something doesn't make sense, stop. Don't push forward hoping it will become clear later. Work on that confusion until it resolves. Try explaining it out loud, as if teaching someone else. Draw diagrams. Make up your own examples. Approach it from different directions. The time spent here isn't wasted. This is where real learning happens. Practice explaining concepts in multiple ways. If you understand something deeply, you should be able to describe it using different analogies, different examples, different levels of detail. Someone who can only explain something one way, using the exact words from the textbook, hasn't truly made it their own. Look for connections between different subjects. Mathematics and music have deep structural similarities. Understanding biological systems can inform thinking about social systems. Physics and philosophy often grapple with related questions about causation and determinism. These connections aren't just interesting. They strengthen understanding in all areas by building bridges between different networks of knowledge. Work through examples completely from first principles. Don't skip steps. Don't accept that something is true just because the book says so. Verify it yourself. This might mean doing calculations the long way, even when shortcuts exist. It might mean proving theorems that are stated without proof in the text. This extra work pays enormous dividends because it builds confidence and genuine understanding. Most importantly, embrace difficulty. When something is hard, that's a sign you're at the edge of your current understanding. That's where growth happens. Easy material doesn't build new connections. It just reinforces what's already there. The struggle with difficult material is the brain actively rewiring itself to accommodate new patterns of thought. There's a deeper truth underlying all of this. The human mind is not a passive receiver of information. It's an active creator of understanding. The genius isn't someone who has more information, or who thinks faster, or who has some magical gift. The genius is someone who has learned to use their mind as a tool for building understanding rather than just accumulating facts. This realization is actually quite liberating. It means that anyone can develop this capacity. It's not about talent or luck. It's about method. It's about consistently applying these principles of breaking things down, building connections, wrestling with confusion, and explaining clearly, Over time, these practices literally reshape the brain, creating new patterns of thinking that become automatic. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. The brain changes slowly through repeated practice. But it does change. Someone who spends months working through difficult material in this way will find that their thinking has fundamentally shifted. Problems that once seemed impossibly complex now appear manageable. New ideas integrate more easily into existing understanding. The world becomes more comprehensible. This is what it means to think like a genius. It's not about being smarter than other people. It's about thinking differently. It's about using the mind as it's capable of being used, rather than settling for superficial understanding. And it's available to anyone willing to do the work. So start now. Take something you're trying to learn and apply these principles. Break it down until each piece is obvious. Build connections to what you already know. Spend time on what confuses you. Explain it in your own words. Do this consistently, and watch as your thinking transforms. The brain you have right now is capable of far more than you've asked of it. The only question is whether you'll give it the chance to show you what it can do. What if I told you that trying to control your mind is exactly what prevents you from controlling it? That the harder you try to force your thoughts into submission, chaotic they become. There's something fundamentally wrong with how people approach the problem of mental control. They treat their minds like wild horses that need to be broken, when what's really needed is something entirely different. The brain doesn't respond to force the way we think it does. This isn't about willpower or discipline in the way most people understand those words. It's about understanding a mechanism that's been operating in every human being since the beginning of consciousness itself. And once you see how it actually works, the whole problem transforms into something much simpler and much more interesting. Let's start with what doesn't work. Watch what happens when someone sits down and decides they're going to concentrate. They set themselves up with a book or a problem to solve, and they make this internal announcement. I will focus. I will not let my mind wander. What happens next? Within minutes, sometimes seconds, the mind is somewhere else entirely. They catch themselves thinking about what they need to do later, or replaying a conversation from yesterday, or wondering why concentration is so difficult. So they pull their attention back more forcefully this time. Focus, they tell themselves, and the cycle continues, getting more frustrating with each repetition. This is the fundamental error. They're treating attention like a spotlight that can be aimed and held in place through sheer determination. But that's not what attention is. It doesn't work that way, and trying to force it creates the very problem you're trying to solve. Here's what's actually happening. When you command yourself to focus, you create a kind of internal supervisor, a part of your mind watching another part of your mind, checking constantly whether you're still focused. This supervisor becomes another thought stream, another voice in your head. Now, instead of one process happening, you have two: the thing you're trying to concentrate on, constant checking to see if you're concentrated. The checking itself is a distraction. You've doubled your mental workload. And there's something else. The moment you notice your mind has wandered, there's often a flash of frustration or self-criticism. There I go again, distracted. This emotion is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Now you're not just distracted, you're distracted and upset about being distracted. It has to process that emotion, which takes energy away from whatever you were trying to focus on in the first place. So what's the alternative? It starts with understanding what the mind naturally does when left alone. Sit quietly for a moment and just watch what happens. Don't try to control anything. Just observe. Thoughts arise spontaneously. An image might appear, or a fragment of a song, or the memory of something someone said. These thoughts aren't interruptions. They're the mind's natural activity, like breathing or a heartbeat. The brain is always generating mental content. That's what brains do. The question isn't how to stop this process. The question is how to work with it rather than against it. And here's the key insight: the mind becomes calm not through force, through interest. Real, genuine interest in something specific pulls your attention like gravity pulls objects. You don't have to try. The focusing happens by itself. What happens when you're genuinely curious about something? Maybe you're reading a mystery story and you really want to know what happens next. You're working on a puzzle that's just at the edge of your ability to solve. Or you're watching something in nature, a spider building a web, the way water flows around rocks in a stream. In those moments, are you telling yourself to focus? Are you fighting off distracting thoughts? No, your attention is simply there, held by the thing that interests you. This is what real concentration looks like. It's not a battle. It's more like the attention gets absorbed into what you're doing. The secret, then, is not to develop some special power of concentration, but to become more genuinely interested in things. To cultivate curiosity rather than willpower. Here's where it gets subtle. You can't force interest any more than you can force concentration. Telling yourself, "I will be interested in this," doesn't work. Interest arises from a different place. It comes from understanding, from seeing something new in what you're looking at, from asking good questions. So the real skill, the thing that actually gives you control over your mind, is learning to ask questions that make whatever you're doing more interesting. Let's say you're reading a difficult textbook. The material seems dry and your mind keeps wandering. The typical response is to try harder, to read more forcefully. That's fighting the wrong battle. What if instead you stopped and asked, "What is this really saying? What would happen if this idea were wrong? How does this connect to something I already understand?" The moment you ask a genuine question, your brain engages differently. It starts looking for answers. Attention happens naturally because you've created a problem that your mind wants to solve. This works because the brain is fundamentally a problem-solving machine. It's been shaped by millions of years of evolution to notice patterns, to figure things out, to make sense of the world. You give it a real question, not a fake one you're asking to trick yourself into paying attention, but a question you actually want answered. The machinery engages automatically. As another principle, the mind needs space to work properly. Imagine you're trying to solve a problem and you stand over yourself, checking every few seconds. Am I solving it yet? Thinking, well, why is this taking so long? That constant self-monitoring creates a kind of mental static. The brain needs room to do its thing. It needs to be able to make mistakes, to go down wrong paths and come back, to make unexpected connections. All of that happens best when you're not constantly interrupting the process to check on it. The way to create this space is peculiar. You observe your mind without judging what you observe. When you notice your attention has drifted, and it will drift, that's completely natural. You simply notice it. No criticism, no frustration. Just, "Oh, I was thinking about something else." And then you gently return to what you were doing. The gentleness is crucial. Harsh self-criticism creates emotional turbulence that makes concentration harder, not easier. Think of it this way. If you're trying to balance something delicate, say a pencil on your finger, you don't succeed by gripping harder or moving your hand violently. You succeed by making very small, gentle adjustments. You stay relaxed and responsive. The same principle applies to mental balance. The lighter your touch, the better the control. Now, there's a deeper layer to this. The reason most people struggle so much with their minds isn't just that they're using the wrong techniques. It's that they've developed a hostile relationship with their own thinking. They see their wandering thoughts as enemies to be fought, their daydreams as weaknesses to be eliminated. What if that's backwards? What if the mind's tendency to wander is actually valuable, and the key is not to eliminate it, but to understand when it's useful and when it's not? Brain wanders for good reasons. When you're stuck on a problem and your mind drifts to something else, it's often gathering related ideas from different contexts, connections that wouldn't occur if you just stared straight ahead. Some of the best insights come not from focused concentration, but from the kind of loose, wandering thought that happens when you're walking or just before falling asleep. The trick is not to be focused all the time, to be able to move between focused and diffuse modes of thinking. This means the goal isn't to achieve some state of permanent laser, like concentration. The goal is to develop a relationship with your own mind where you can recognize what mode you're in, and shift when needed. Sometimes you need tight focus. When you're working through a detailed calculation, for example, or following the logic of an argument. Times you need your mind to roam more freely. When you're trying to come up with new ideas or see a problem from a different angle. The ability to recognize these states and move between them comes from practice. Not the practice of forcing your mind into submission, the practice of observing how your mind actually behaves. You start to notice patterns. You see that after a certain amount of time concentrating intensely, your mind needs to wander. You discover that trying to focus when you're tired just creates frustration. A short walk or even just looking out the window for a few minutes can restore your ability to concentrate. This kind of self-knowledge is practical in the deepest sense. It's not about following some system that worked for someone else. It's about understanding your own mental machinery well enough to work with it effectively. Understanding only comes through observation, the same kind of careful observation a scientist brings to studying anything. Here's a concrete example of how this works. Suppose you're trying to understand something complex, a mathematical proof, or the way a mechanical device works, or the plot of a complicated story. The typical approach is to read through it once, maybe twice, trying to hold everything in mind at once. When it doesn't stick, people often blame their memory or their intelligence. What happens if you take a different approach? You read a bit, then pause and ask yourself, what did that actually say? Can I explain it in my own words? If you can't, that's information. It tells you exactly where your understanding breaks down. So you go back to that specific part. You don't just read it again. You engage with it. You ask questions. Why does it work this way? What would happen if this part were different? How does this connect to what came before? This is slower than just reading straight through. Here's what's interesting: your mind doesn't wander as much when you're working this way. Why? Because you're giving your brain something active to do. The mind wanders when it's bored, when it's being asked to passively receive information without processing it. When you're actively questioning and testing your understanding, engagement happens naturally. You're not trying to concentrate. You're doing something that requires concentration. And there's another benefit. When you work this way, you actually understand what you're learning. The information isn't just passing through your mind, it's being integrated into your existing knowledge. This means you remember it better, and you can use it in new situations. The slower, more engaged approach turns out to be much faster in the long run, because you're not constantly having to relearn things you've forgotten. The same principle applies to any skill you're trying to develop. You're learning to solve physics problems or play an instrument or speak a new language. Isn't, how do I make myself practice more? The question is, how do I make practice interesting enough that my attention stays engaged? And the answer is always the same. Break it down into challenges that are right at the edge of what you can currently do, clear enough that you can tell whether you're succeeding, interesting enough that you want to know the answer. When practice has these qualities, concentration takes care of itself. You don't need to force it because your attention is naturally pulled into what you're doing. This is why people can spend hours completely absorbed in a hobby or a game that matches their skill level, while they can barely sit still for 10 minutes with something that's either too easy or too hard or just presented in a boring way. So here's what it all comes down to. Controlling your mind isn't about developing some mystical power of concentration. It's not about willpower or discipline in the brute force sense. It's about three things. First, understanding how attention actually works, how it's pulled by interest rather than forced by effort, how the act of monitoring yourself can become its own distraction. Gentleness works better than force. Second, developing the ability to make things interesting through the questions you ask. This is a skill you can practice. The more you do it, you get at finding the interesting aspects of whatever you're working with. Third, observing your own mind carefully enough to understand its patterns. When it works well, when it needs rest, what genuinely engages it versus what you think should engage it. None of this is complicated in principle. But like anything worth doing, It takes practice to develop. The good news is that the practice itself isn't a struggle. Once you stop trying to fight your own mind and start working with it instead, the whole process becomes much more pleasant. You might even find yourself enjoying the kind of focused work that used to feel like torture. There's a certain freedom that comes from understanding this. Most people feel like prisoners of their own thoughts, constantly battling their wandering attention, beating themselves up for not concentrating better. But when you see that the wandering is natural, that it can be redirected through interest rather than force, the key is curiosity rather than discipline. Suddenly the whole problem looks different. You're not trying to conquer some enemy. You're just learning to work with a mechanism that's been there all along. The mind is an extraordinary instrument. It can solve problems, create beauty, stand the deepest workings of nature. But it works best when it's engaged, curious, and free to make connections in its own way. Your job isn't to control it in the sense of dominating it. Your job is to understand it well enough to point it in useful directions, and then get out of the way and let it work. Control, knowing when to guide and when to simply observe, when to focus and when to let your thoughts roam, when to push and when to rest. This understanding doesn't come overnight, but it's worth pursuing because once you have it, you're no longer fighting a losing battle with your own mind. You're working with it, using it the way it was meant to be used, and that makes all the difference. The secret isn't forcing memorization, it's lighting a child's curiosity. Every word you say, every gesture, every how you offer can repair or build a bridge in their brain. Curiosity isn't a small detail of genius, it's the root. It's where big ideas, world-changing projects, and human progress begin. Learning quickly and easily almost always connects to genuine interest. A person who's obsessed and takes pleasure in what they do learns far faster than someone who sees no point in it. Here's the key. To turn a child into someone who learns for pleasure, not obligation, follow 3 simple principles. Simplify any topic, make learning fun, and listen with the same intensity with which you teach. The method I'm proposing follows that path exactly. First, choose an image or an object that tells a story. Second, describe that story in very simple language, the way you'd speak to a 7-year-old. Third, ask the child to explain it back in their own words, without fear, without immediate correction. Here's the power. When a child tries to explain, they organize their thinking, reveal gaps, and form links between what they see and what they feel. When you correct, don't say, "That's wrong." Correct with a new example, a mini experiment, or a concrete gesture. And always, always celebrate the attempt, not just the right answer. That builds courage. Without courage, there is no deep learning. Now let's put this into practice. Imagine teaching fractions with cookies. Take 6 cookies, or pieces of paper, place them in front of the child and say, "Let's divide a treasure." Ask them to make 2 equal piles. Watch. If they hesitate, ask, "How do you know they're equal?" Let them explain. If their explanation fails, don't give the answer. Show 2 piles and ask them to swap 1 cookie between the piles so they can feel the difference. Then ask them to tell the story of what happened in their own words. When they say, "One got bigger," turn the phrasing back to their perspective. Yes, when we swapped a cookie, that pile got bigger. Why do you think that happened? That pushes argumentation and language. For new vocabulary, use the same tactic. Image plus phrase in the child's native language plus acting it out. Then ask them to teach it to you. At first it's translation, then independence follows. She'll start thinking in the new word without translating. Create micro-routines of 10 to 20 minutes that always end with the child saying, "Teach me." For example, 10 minutes of picture reading, 5 minutes to draw the story, and 5 minutes to explain it to you, without looking at the book. In each session, ask only 2 key questions. What did you understand? And how would you explain this to John? Using a friend's name forces simplicity. Use role play. Turn the child into the teacher for 3 minutes. Give them an imaginary blackboard, ask them to explain, then follow up with genuine curiosity. That simple game builds autonomy and creates a repetition rhythm that locks the mental structure in place without boredom. Never underestimate the power of tone. The words you use when you correct shape a child's identity. Instead of, "You're wrong," try, "Interesting. Tell me again how you got to that." Swap wrong for not yet. Small phrases make huge emotional repairs. The same goes for praise. Instead of, "Good job," say, "I see you tried X and noticed Y." That shows your brain is connecting ideas. That teaches process, not outcome. When a child says, "This is hard," turn it into an operation. Which part is hard? Pick one word: confused, long, boring. And let's sketch a single step to fix that. You're teaching metacognition, thinking about thinking. Metacognition is what separates repeaters from masters. Bring movement and multisensory experience in. Walk around while you explain. Draw in the air with your finger. Use objects. Do short dramatizations. The body helps the brain lock in abstract logic. For math, build stories with characters. For science, run tiny experiments. A cup of water, a balloon, a shadow. For reading, turn pages into maps. Where are we in the story? Draw the character's map. Use songs and rhymes for grammar and vocabulary. Keep the element of surprise. Change rules, swap roles, offer symbolic rewards, a teacher for 5 minutes certificate. Curiosity is the engine. Your job is to keep it burning with small, manageable failures that provoke questions, not with pre-cooked answers. Think long-term. Transformative education isn't a magic trick. It's a habit of connection. Listen to the questions children ask and answer with another question that forces them to build meaning. If a child asks why 3 times in a row, you have a gold mine. Let them lead the experiment. Take notes, drawings, marks, and at the end, ask them to summarize in one simple sentence. Track progress with a wall of small wins. Not cold grades, but entries like, "Today I explained why the moon looks bigger." Those records become emotional fuel. The child sees their trail of progress and wants to keep going. And you, as the teacher, must be vigilant. Every word you say is liquid that molds beliefs. Finally, be radically present. Teaching well requires listening, eye to eye, distraction-free, with questions that provoke thinking. When the child explains, don't finish their sentences. Wait through the silence. That's where the brain knits connections. When they fail, turn the mistake into a stage for inquiry. Interesting. Shall we test hypothesis X? Be a partner in discovery, not a judge. Remember, there are incredible ways to teach that turn disinterest into passion. The Feynman technique applied to a child is simple. Choose what to teach, simplify it, ask the child to teach it back, identify where they stumble, and repeat with a new example. If you do this every day with joy and attention, there's a real chance they'll become interested in anything. Start today. Take their hand, point at an object and say, "Teach me this." You might be opening the door to an extraordinary future. When a child says, "I don't want to," pause for a second and treat it as a clue, not a challenge. Say in a calm, curious voice, "I hear you. Tell me why you don't want to do this right now." Validating isn't giving in. It opens the door to conversation. Resistance is almost always fear, tiredness, or the feeling that the task is impossible. Instead of pushing, offer a reduction. Just 2 minutes. Then you decide. The 2-minute rule works like magic. It lowers the barrier and creates a real chance for engagement. If they say, "It's boring," don't argue. Make a practical change. Offer 2 controlled options. Do you want to draw this or teach it to someone? And always pick the option that preserves learning. Autonomy reduces resistance. Another immediate tactic. Turn the activity into a quick experiment. Let's just test this like scientists. Make a hypothesis in 30 seconds. Kids love testing hypotheses. Being a scientist becomes a game. In daily practice, have go-to phrases at the ready. If a child says, "I don't want to," respond, "Okay, tell me which part bothers you." If they say it's hard, ask, Which little part is hard? The words, the idea, or the drawing? If a parent questions you, say, "I understand. Want to see a 5-minute demo now?" These short phrases steer the conversation toward action, not debate. Use micro-rewards and social roles. Offer a sticker for effort, or turn the learner into the teacher for 3 minutes. Often the child who resists just wants to prove they can. Giving them the teacher role activates pride and reduces pushback. If resistance persists, break the task into 30 to 60-second steps and celebrate the smallest effort. You started. That's already courage. Document quickly. Take a fast photo of the child explaining and ask for one sentence. "Today I taught. In 2 weeks, show this material to parents or administration." Simple evidence defeats skepticism. Finally, memorize 3 lines that always work. Validation plus question. "I understand. Why do you prefer not to do this now?" Reduction plus choice. "Just 2 minutes. Or would you rather do it later?" You decide. Light challenge plus role. "Teach me just one part. If you don't like it, we stop." Never force a child to do something they don't want to do. Stop. Calmly ask, "Why don't you want to do this now?" And really listen. The answer is the clue to adapt the activity. Rather than impose, offer choices, shrink the task, and turn it into a game or role until interest emerges. That's how you teach with respect, effectiveness, and joy, and create learning that lasts. If you found this method useful, subscribe now so you don't miss the next videos. Here, practice beats theory. Leave a like if you found it helpful, and comment below what you'll try first. Write 1 line, or share a result. I read everything. Share this with a teacher, parent, or caregiver who needs it. Tag someone who will put it into practice. Hit the bell to get the next micro sessions and ready-made lesson scripts. Let's turn curiosity into habit. See you in the